Bearwalker by Joseph Bruchak. Chapter 17. Not a myth. Jason Jones is real. He's not a myth at all. Mr. Philo is shaking his head. Of course, he says. I should have recognized him. But his hair was blonde and crew-cut when he was a boy, and his eyes were blue. Why is he pretending to be an Indian? Mrs. Philo pats her husband on the arm. Hair dye, she says. Contact lenses. That poor boy always did go in for drama. Remember how he kept changing his name and saying he was really adopted? Can you blame him for that? After how he was treated by them? He probably does think he's an Indian now. Poor deluded boy. Mr. Philo shakes his head again. He's holding the shotgun loosely in one hand with its barrel now pointing at the floor. He's not a poor boy any longer, Dora, he says. Even when he was 14, he was dangerous. How did the state ever let him out? You know he blames us for what happened to him. I know, Mrs. Philo says, taking her husband's hand as he leans the shotgun in the corner. I know, Wally. What happened to the real Jason Jones? The one who is calling himself Walker White Bear? Mr. Wilbur doesn't know the real story any more than I do, and we both listen as the Philos fill us in about the poor boy who was the son of a camp cook and a caretaker here at Chuckamuck over 20 years ago. That cook and the caretaker were new, and they showed up with their gangly teenage son in tow, a big boy who was withdrawn and wouldn't make eye contact. The Philos, who had always been kind-hearted, decided to let Jason take part in all the regular activities, as if he were one of the regular campers. We thought it would do the lad good, Mr. Philo says. I come from humble beginnings myself. But they'd missed two things. The first was how badly he had been abused by someone. Really badly abused. They first began to realize that when they noticed the scars on his arms and legs the day Jason came for swimming lessons. Scars from burns. An accident, Jason's father said when Mr. Philo asked him about it. The kid's always been clumsy. From that day on, no matter how hot it was, Jason wore long-sleeve shirts and slacks and didn't come to any more swimming lessons. The second things the Philos failed to notice was that the big, shy boy's personality was what people now call bipolar, with a good amount of paranoid schizophrenia mixed in. The other campers hadn't tortured him or played mean tricks on him at all. He'd imagined all that, and come to the Philos time after time to complain about what the other kids had been doing to him. But it wasn't true. What was true was that Jason Jones really was being abused by his own parents, even though he denied it when the Philos asked him directly about it. Then the Philos' cat disappeared. For a day or two, they thought a coyote might have gotten it, until Jason said in an innocent voice, Did anyone look back in the clearing along the trail to the spring? Mr. Philo found the cat, what was left of it, in the clearing. The footprints in the soft earth matched those of only one person. The stories about Jason killing other campers weren't true. It went no further than the cat. The Philos brought in the sheriff's office and people from social services. All three members of the Jones family were interviewed, and at one point Jason confessed to killing the Philos' cat and other small animals over the past years. He also admitted that it was his father who beat and tortured him whenever he got drunk, which was every weekend. It was all put on tape, which was good since Jason later denied all of it and claimed that the Philos were the ones who had mistreated him. They were out to get him and his family, he said. It was all their fault. The Joneses were fired from Camp Chuckamuck. Jason was put on medication and sent into foster care, even though he begged to stay with his mother and father. We kept up with what happened to them through the papers, Mrs. Philo sighs. It was such a tragedy. Jason Jones was finally allowed to go back to his family. He was 19 years old by then, a huge hulking man and no longer a little boy. Somehow, despite his medical history, he'd been accepted in the army and had been to boot camp and trained for the Rangers. Then he was home on a weekend leave. Jason's story, Mr. Philo says, was that intruders broke in and did what was done. But the story didn't hold up. He was tried for the murder of his parents. And because of the way the trial went, because of the unbalanced way he acted and the outrageous things he said, why, at one point he stated that Wally and I were the ones who'd gone there and done that dreadful deed, Mrs. Philo interjects. Mr. Philo nods. In the end, a decision was made to send him to a secure medical facility instead of a regular prison. We'd thought he'd spend his life in there, Mrs. Philo adds. But apparently not, Mr. Philo concludes. A long silence follows. I think I know the question that is in everyone's mind, but no one speaks up. So I do. Well, what do we do now? I ask, stepping up to the table. I'm surprised at how calm and clear my voice is. Mr. Wilbur actually chuckles. Baron, he said, thanks for cutting through the gloom. You have hit the nail on the proverbial head. Any ideas? A chair scrapes on the floor and I turn to look. Mrs. Osgood has just stood up and walked over to one of the cupboards. I've got one, she says, as she rummages around and pulls out a cell phone. We can call for help. The sheriff's department can have a mountain rescue helicopter in here by first light. Cell phones don't work around here, Mr. Wilbur says. They don't work most places, young fella, Mrs. Osgood replies, a no-nonsense tone in her voice. But George found one place where you can pick up a signal. He calls it the bear seat. Look. Everyone gathers around the table as Mrs. Osgood pulls out a map of the trails and unfolds it. Up here, she says, just a random scoot. Not more than 1.5 miles. I remember that spot, Mr. Philo says. It's the west lookout on the side of Pishka Mountain. There is a rock slab there that looks rather like a bench. Yep, Mrs. Osgood says. The bears like to come at sunset and sit there. That is why George calls it the bear seat. Mr. Philo taps the map with a long index finger. I know that place also. I always led our trail hikes past there, though I never saw a bear. You never was an Abenaki either, Mrs. Osgood says. Her voice is light and teasing, which is strange seeing as how her husband's bloody jacket is still resting on the floor behind her. Or perhaps not so strange because she is so certain he's alive. Then again, everything is weird right now. This night, the way we are talking, my head is swimming from the strangeness of it all. Mr. Philo smiles back at her. Point taken. All I am saying is that it is an easy hike to get there. It's only 100 yards off the main marked trail. I could do it in the dark. Mrs. Philo is patting her husband's arm. He turns to look at her. What? He says. Not with those knees, and she pats his chest. This heart, dear. All right, point taken. He looks at Mr. Wilbur. So, Kirk, will you be the one to do it? Think you can locate the spot? Piece of cake, Mr. Wilbur says. Even a child could find the way. He turns to Mr. Mack, who is still slouched in his seat at the other end of the room, a blank, uncaring look on his face. Does he have any weapons? Did any of you bring any firearms? Mr. Mack looks up like a man waking from an unpleasant dream. Slowly he shakes his head. No. None of us had guns. We never planned violence. All he has is that big knife of his. Mr. Mack's whole body shivers. He said the only way to kill is hand to hand. Guns are for cowards. Good that we only have the gun, then, Mr. Philo says. For all the good it will do you, Mrs. Osgood adds. I suppose she's right. Whoever takes that phone will have to avoid getting ambushed by Walker Whitebear or Jason Jones or whoever the homicidal maniac thinks he is. Even a shotgun may not be enough protection. Mr. Wilbur takes the phone from her. Maybe we could do something out front to draw attention there. Then I can slip out the back, circle past the lake, and hit the trail over there. He lifts up the big flashlight, then puts it down. Baron, I should probably borrow that little headlamp of yours. A small light like that is less likely to be seen. I can just flick it on now and then to find the silver trail markers. I'd forgotten I was still wearing the flashlight. I take it off my forehead and hand it to him. I wish there was something more I could do or even say to help. Mr. Wilbur turns back and reaches toward the corner. A perplexed look comes over his face. Where is it? Are you looking for this? A sarcastic voice says. We all turn to see Mr. Mack, his back straight, not slouching in terror and despair any longer. There is a very unpleasant smile on his face. The shotgun he's holding is pointed at all of us.